Have you ever felt that your addictions have a purpose, that maybe God isn't condemning you, but preparing you through them? Carl Jung spent decades studying the human psyche and discovered something revolutionary. Certain compulsions that society condemns can be portals to the divine. While the world judges you, these marks might be molding you for a destiny that ordinary people will never reach. What makes you feel different, strange, even broken, might be exactly what separates you from the sleeping crowd. Jung called this the individuation process, a painful journey where even our vices serve as fuel for spiritual transformation. In this video, we'll explore 5 addictions that, from a Jungian perspective, can be signs of a greater calling. It's not about romanticizing pain, but about understanding that your tortuous journey might have profound meaning. Prepare to see your struggles under a completely new light. Maybe you were never just addicted. Maybe you've always been in the process of becoming. Throughout history, mystics, shamans, and spiritual seekers have understood something that modern society desperately tries to suppress. The human soul sometimes needs to break free from ordinary consciousness to touch the divine. Jung recognized this truth in his own dangerous experiments with the unconscious, descending into what he called his confrontation with the inner abyss. He didn't stumble into madness by accident. He went there deliberately, knowing that transformation requires us to shatter the comfortable prison of normal awareness. When you reach for that substance, that moment of escape, you're not just running away. Something deeper is happening. Your soul is screaming for expansion beyond the suffocating limitations of everyday existence. The 9 to 5 world, the small talk, the pretending that everything is fine when you can feel the universe trembling beneath the surface of reality. Normal people can live their entire lives in that shallow water, but you can't. Something in you knows there's an ocean waiting. Jung discovered that the psyche contains layers most people never access. He called it the collective unconscious, a realm where personal identity dissolves and you touch something vast and eternal. Every culture throughout time has found ways to reach these depths, whether through fasting, meditation, sleep deprivation, or yes, substances that crack open the doors of perception. The method matters less than the yearning itself. That hunger to see beyond the veil isn't weakness. It's your soul remembering it was never meant to stay confined in the shallow end of existence. But here's what makes this different from mere escapism. True seekers don't just want to feel good, they want to feel real. They want to strip away every false layer until they touch something authentic, even if it burns. When you alter your consciousness, you're conducting an experiment with reality itself. You're asking dangerous questions. What if this ordinary world is the illusion? What if the strange visions and insights that come in altered states are actually more true than the manufactured reality everyone else accepts without question? The problem isn't the seeking. The problem is that we live in a world that has forgotten how to hold space for this sacred hunger. Ancient cultures had rituals, guides, containers for these journeys into expanded consciousness. They understood that touching the divine requires preparation, intention, and integration. Today, you're left alone with your yearning, stumbling through experiences that should be honored as spiritual quests, but instead get labeled as addiction and disease. Jung believed that what we call mental illness or addiction often masks a spiritual emergency. The psyche is trying to break through, trying to evolve, trying to shed an old skin that no longer fits. But without proper guidance, this transformation looks like destruction. Your compulsion to alter your state might be a confused attempt at what mystics call ego death, the necessary dissolution of your small self so something greater can emerge. You're trying to die and be reborn, but you're doing it without a map, in a culture that has lost all understanding of sacred transformation. Every time you seek that altered state, you're following an ancient impulse that shamans would recognize immediately. You're trying to journey beyond the middle world of ordinary life into the upper and lower realms where real power dwells. The tragedy is that you're making this heroic journey alone, without elders who understand, without ritual to contain the experience, without community to help you bring back the wisdom and integrate it into your life. The substances themselves aren't the point. They're just crude tools, keys that fit locks your soul desperately wants to open. What matters is the impulse behind them, the refusal to accept that this thin slice of consciousness we call normal is all there is. That refusal, that holy dissatisfaction, that restless hunger for more, that's the mark. Not everyone feels it. Most people are content with the surface. But you're not. You never were. And that uncomfortable truth has been driving you toward altered states since you first realized that ordinary awareness feels like a cage. This brings us directly to why that hunger for altered consciousness so often walks hand in hand with an equally powerful need to be alone. Once you've tasted expanded awareness, once you've seen beyond the agreed-upon hallucination that society calls reality, you can't go back to small talk and pretending. The noise of other people becomes unbearable. Not because you hate them, but because their concerns suddenly seem so distant from what you now know is real and important. Jung himself withdrew from society repeatedly throughout his life. After his break with Freud, he spent years in relative isolation, building stone towers with his own hands, exploring his inner world with an intensity that worried everyone around him. He wasn't running from people. He was running towards something that can only be found in profound solitude. He understood that certain truths only speak in silence, and certain transformations only happen when you stop performing for others and face yourself without distraction. Your need to isolate isn't antisocial behavior, it's spiritual hygiene. Every interaction with unconscious people drains something vital from you. They want you to engage with their dramas, their gossip, their complaints about traffic and weather, and all the trivial concerns that fill up a life that has never questioned its own foundations. Meanwhile, you're trying to process experiences and insights that have no language, trying to integrate shifts in consciousness that would sound insane if you tried to explain them. Solitude becomes addictive because it's the only place you can take off the mask. Jung talked about the persona, the false face we show the world, the acceptable version of ourselves we construct to fit in and function in society. Maintaining that persona requires constant energy. Every conversation, every social obligation, every moment of pretending to care about things that don't matter, it all feeds the persona and starves your authentic self. Only in solitude can you let that mask fall away and remember who you actually are beneath all the performance. But there's something even deeper happening. In true solitude, you're not really alone. Jung discovered that when you sit with yourself long enough, when you stop filling the silence with distraction, other voices begin to emerge. Not the voice of madness, but the voice of what he called the self, the deeper intelligence that guides your individuation. This self speaks through dreams, through sudden insights, through the strange synchronicities that multiply when you're paying attention. But it can't compete with the noise of constant social engagement. People who have never experienced this kind of solitude think isolation equals loneliness. They can't imagine wanting to be alone. To them, solitude is punishment, something to be avoided at all costs. They need constant validation from others, constant distraction, constant confirmation that they exist because someone else acknowledges them. But you're different. You've discovered that the most profound company comes not from other people, but from diving deep into your own depths and finding that you contain multitudes. This is why your relationships often feel shallow and disappointing. You're not looking for someone to pass time with. You're looking for someone who has also made the journey inward, someone who understands that true intimacy requires two people who have first learned to be whole alone. Most people couple up out of fear of solitude. They use relationships as distraction from themselves. But once you've tasted the richness of your inner world, you can't settle for that kind of desperate clinging. The addiction to solitude intensifies because each time you withdraw, you discover more. The inner landscape reveals itself slowly, layer by layer. Just when you think you've explored it all, you find another door, another level, another mystery waiting. This isn't narcissism or self-absorption. This is archaeology of the soul. You're excavating the parts of yourself that society taught you to bury, reclaiming the aspects of your being that didn't fit the acceptable template. Furthermore, if you want to continue unearthing your inner self and delve even deeper, integrating your shadows and lights, check out the SIM Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. This journey inward inevitably leads you to become obsessed with what others refuse to see. Once you've spent enough time in solitude, peeling back your own layers, you start recognizing the layers everywhere else. The lies people tell themselves, the stories societies build to avoid uncomfortable realities, the comfortable fictions that keep everyone asleep. And once you see through the veil, you can't unsee it. You become addicted to finding more truth, digging deeper, questioning everything, even when ignorance would be so much easier. Jung understood this compulsion intimately. He spent his life excavating truths that made people deeply uncomfortable. He looked at dreams and saw messages from the unconscious that most dismissed as random nonsense. He studied mythology, alchemy, and world religions, finding patterns that revealed universal truths about human nature. He didn't do this casually. He was driven by an insatiable need to understand what lies beneath the surface of accepted reality. This wasn't academic curiosity. It was spiritual hunger. When you develop this addiction, you stop taking anything at face value. The news media becomes transparent propaganda. Political theater reveals itself as distraction from real power structures. Even science, which claims objectivity, shows its biases and blind spots. You start seeing how much of what people call truth is just agreed upon fiction, stories we tell ourselves to avoid the terrifying freedom of admitting we don't really know anything for certain. Most people find comfort in these shared delusions. You find them suffocating. This is why you devour information at 3 in the morning. Why you fall down research rabbit holes that last for days. Why you can't watch a movie or read a book without analyzing the symbols, the hidden meanings, the deeper layers most people miss entirely. Your mind has become a relentless truth-seeking machine, and it won't let you rest in comfortable ignorance anymore. Every official narrative gets questioned, every mainstream belief gets examined, every accepted fact gets tested against your own experience and intuition. Jung called this the process of making the unconscious conscious. Most of humanity lives in a dream state, sleepwalking through life, repeating patterns they never examine, believing things they never question, following rules they never understood. But something woke you up. Maybe it was trauma. Maybe it was one of those altered states we talked about earlier. Maybe it was just the accumulation of too many things that didn't add up. Whatever the catalyst, you crossed a threshold. You became someone who needs to know what's really happening. Even when the truth is disturbing, the addiction intensifies because truth is fractal. Every answer reveals 10 more questions. Every layer you peel back shows another layer beneath it. You thought you were going to find solid ground eventually, some bedrock of absolute truth you could finally rest on. Instead, you discovered that reality is more mysterious than you ever imagined. The more you learn, the more you realize how little anyone actually knows. And somehow, this uncertainty becomes more addictive than any comfortable certainty could ever be. People around you start calling you paranoid, cynical, conspiracy-minded. They don't understand that you're not making things up. You're just refusing to accept the sanitized version of reality that keeps everyone else comfortable. You've seen how much gets hidden, how much gets distorted, how much truth gets buried under official stories and social conventions. You've learned to trust your own perception over collective agreement. This makes you dangerous to systems that depend on everyone believing the same lies. But here's what separates your search from mere paranoia. You're not just tearing down false beliefs, you're looking for something real to build on. Jung believed that beneath all the cultural conditioning and personal neurosis, there exists a true self, an authentic core that knows things the conscious mind has forgotten. Your obsessive truth-seeking is actually a search for that inner knowing. You're trying to strip away everything false until only what's real remains, no matter how small that might be. Your relentless pursuit of truth inevitably leads you into territory that most people spend their entire lives avoiding: pain. Not the random suffering that happens to everyone, but the deliberate choice to walk through fire because you know it will forge you into something stronger. You've developed a strange relationship with discomfort. While others run from it, you've learned to run toward it. Not because you're masochistic, but because you've discovered that everything worth having lives on the other side of what hurts. Jung himself underwent what he called his creative illness, a period of psychological torment that nearly destroyed him, but ultimately became the foundation for his life's work. He didn't accidentally stumble into this darkness. At some level, he chose it. He chose to confront the terrifying contents of his own unconscious rather than live a comfortable lie. He emerged transformed, but the journey nearly killed him. This is the pattern of the wounded healer, and once you recognize it in yourself, you can't go back to seeking comfort over growth. You've noticed something that unconscious people miss. They spend enormous energy trying to avoid pain, building walls around themselves, numbing everything uncomfortable, and they end up stuck. Their lives become smaller and smaller as they eliminate anything that might hurt. But you've learned that pain is information. It shows you where you're still attached to illusions. It reveals the places you haven't yet integrated. It burns away the false parts of yourself that need to die so something authentic can be born. This is why you keep choosing the hard path, why you leave relationships that are comfortable but dead, why you quit jobs that pay well but kill your soul, why you can't stay in any situation that requires you to betray yourself, even when staying would be so much easier. People think you're self-destructive. They don't understand that you're self-liberating. Every time you walk into the fire, you're shedding another layer of who you're not. The pain is the price of becoming real. Jung wrote about the alchemical process of transformation, how base metal must be broken down completely before it can be reconstituted as gold. Solve et coagula, dissolve and reform. This isn't metaphor. This is the actual process your psyche undergoes during real transformation. Everything false must be burned away. Every comfortable identity must die. Every security must be surrendered. The process is agonizing because you're dismantling yourself at the deepest level, and you're conscious while it happens. Most people have a breaking point where they say enough, where they choose numbness over continued growth. They reach a level of discomfort they can't tolerate, and they stop there, building a life around avoiding any further pain. But you have a different threshold. Or maybe you don't have one at all. You've become addicted to the breakthrough that comes after the breakdown. You've learned to recognize that moment when everything falls apart as the moment right before everything comes together in a new configuration. So you keep going back to the fire. This doesn't mean you enjoy suffering. The pain is real and it's terrible. But you've developed a relationship with it that transforms its meaning. You see it as initiation, as the labor pains of rebirth, as the necessary price for authentic transformation. Ancient mystery schools understood this. They put initiates through ordeals specifically designed to break them open. Vision quests, isolation, physical trials, psychological pressure, not to torture them, but to create the conditions where transformation becomes possible. Your addiction to transformative pain makes you incomprehensible to people who are still trying to build a life based on comfort and security. They look at your choices and see chaos. They see you destroying good situations for no reason they can understand. What they miss is that you're not destroying for destruction's sake. You're clearing ground. You're burning away the old to make space for the new. You've learned that stagnation is a slower death than transformation, and you've chosen the quicker fire. This willingness to endure pain for transformation naturally leads to a mind that cannot rest in certainty. Once you've been broken open and rebuilt enough times, once you've discovered how many of your supposedly solid beliefs were actually fragile constructions, you lose the ability to take anything as permanently true. You become addicted to questioning, to examining, to tearing apart every assumption to see if it can survive scrutiny. This isn't doubt for the sake of doubt. This is the refusal to build your life on foundations you haven't personally tested. Jung spent decades questioning the fundamental assumptions of his field. Freud had created a neat system that explained everything through sexuality and childhood trauma. The entire psychoanalytic establishment accepted these ideas as truth. But Jung couldn't stop asking uncomfortable questions. What if there's more to the unconscious than repressed personal material? What if there are layers of the psyche that connect us to something transpersonal, even spiritual? His questions got him expelled from the inner circle, branded a mystic and a heretic. But he couldn't stop himself. The addiction to questioning was stronger than the desire to belong. You recognize this pattern in yourself. You can't just accept what authorities tell you, even authorities you respect. Every teaching has to be tested against your own experience. Every belief has to be examined from multiple angles. Every certainty has to be questioned until it either proves itself resilient or reveals itself as another comfortable fiction. This makes you exhausting to be around for people who want simple answers and clear directions. They want you to just pick a side, choose a belief system, plant your flag somewhere and stop moving. But you can't. The questions never stop coming. This addiction manifests in every area of your life. You question your relationships constantly, not because you want to destroy them, but because you need to know if they're real or just habit. You question your career path, your goals, your values, your identity itself. Nothing gets to remain unexamined. Nothing gets grandfather claused in just because it used to work or because everyone else accepts it. Your mind has become a crucible where every belief must be melted down and reformed or discarded entirely. People mistake this for instability or lack of commitment. They think you can't make up your mind or stick with anything. What they don't understand is that you're operating at a different level of integrity. You've discovered that false certainty is worse than honest uncertainty. You'd rather live with questions that disturb you than answers that comfort you through deception. This is rare. Most people will accept almost any answer, no matter how flimsy, rather than sit with not knowing. But you've developed a tolerance for ambiguity that borders on preference. Jung believed that the psyche naturally seeks wholeness, but wholeness isn't the same as perfection or certainty. Wholeness means integrating the contradictions, holding the tensions, accepting that truth is paradoxical and reality contains opposites. Your constant questioning is actually the mechanism by which you approach this wholeness. Every time you dismantle a false certainty, you create space for a more nuanced, more complete understanding. You're not tearing down to destroy. You're tearing down to rebuild something more authentic. The addiction becomes most visible in how you consume information. You can't just read one perspective on anything. You need to see how different people understand the same event, the same concept, the same truth. You're constantly triangulating, looking for what remains consistent when you strip away bias and agenda. You've become a detective of reality, and the case never closes. There's always more evidence to gather, always another angle to consider, always another question that changes everything. This makes rest difficult. Your mind doesn't shut off. Even when you try to relax, the questions keep coming. What if you're wrong about this? What if there's another way to see that? What if the opposite is also true? It's exhausting, but it's also exhilarating, because every real answer you find, every genuine insight that survives your interrogation, becomes something you can actually trust. You're building a foundation, one tested truth at a time. And even if it takes your whole life, it will be real in a way that borrowed beliefs never could be. So here you are, marked by these 5 addictions that set you apart from the sleeping masses. The addiction to altered states that showed you reality has more dimensions than society admits. The addiction to solitude, where you learn to hear the voice of your authentic self. The addiction to hidden truths that made comfortable lies unbearable. The addiction to transformative pain that taught you growth requires destruction. And the addiction to questioning everything that prevents you from ever settling into false certainty again. These aren't 5 separate problems. They're 5 facets of one sacred crisis, one divine emergency, one process of becoming that you can't stop, even if you wanted to. Jung would tell you that these addictions are symptoms of individuation, that dangerous journey from who you were supposed to be toward who you actually are. Most people never make this journey. They live their entire lives inside the personas they constructed to fit in, following scripts they never wrote, believing things they never examined, dying without ever knowing themselves. But something wouldn't let you stay asleep. Whether you call it God, the self, or just a glitch in your programming, something marked you for this harder path. The weight of these marks is real. You've probably felt it crushing you at times. The isolation that comes from seeing what others don't see. The exhaustion of constantly transforming while everyone else stays comfortable in their stagnation. The pain of walking away from everything familiar because it stopped being true. The loneliness of carrying questions in a world that wants easy answers. There have been moments when you wished you could be like them, the unconscious ones, the sleepers who find happiness in simple things and never feel this relentless drive towards something they can't even name. But you can't go back. Once you've been marked, once these addictions have taken hold, there's only forward. And here's what Jung discovered after his own descent into the depths. The suffering has meaning. The isolation is necessary. The pain is purposeful. You're not being punished with these addictions. You're being prepared. Prepared for what? You might not know yet. But everything you've endured, every comfortable thing you've sacrificed, every certainty you've surrendered, it's all been shaping you into something that ordinary life could never forge. These marks mean you're not done yet. You're still becoming. And yes, it hurts. Yes, it's lonely. Yes, there are days when you wonder if it's worth it. But deep down, beneath all the pain and confusion, you know you wouldn't trade this for comfortable unconsciousness. You've tasted something real. You've touched something true. And once you have that, once you know it exists, you can't pretend anymore. You can't go back to sleep just because everyone else is dreaming. So carry these marks with a strange kind of pride, not arrogance, but recognition. You're one of the ones who couldn't stay comfortable with lies. One of the ones who had to know, even when knowing costs everything. One of the ones willing to be broken apart so something true could emerge from the pieces. Jung called people like you the wounded healers, the ones who descend into hell not just for themselves, but to bring back medicine for others still trapped in unconscious suffering. Your addictions aren't weaknesses to overcome. They're tools for transformation. They're the sacred thorns that keep you from settling, the divine discontent that won't let you rest in anything false. Yes, they hurt. Yes, they isolate you. Yes, they make life harder than it needs to be, but they also make you real in a way that comfort never could. And in a world drowning in pleasant lies, your uncomfortable truth is exactly what's needed. The mark is heavy, but it's yours. and it means you were never meant for a small life.